Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Chapter 4 video lecture talking about building muscular strength and endurance. So in this chapter, we'll get into strength training principles, and an understanding of how important strength training is to achieving optimal health. Alright, so first of all, the purpose of strength training, and this is what I try to tell students and clients alike. The primary purpose of strength training should be to stabilize your joints. And the reason why I mention that is because every joint is impacted by opposing muscle groups. So if you strengthen or work one set of muscles or one group of muscles, it's important to work the opposing muscle group as well, because if you don't do that, then one muscle group will get stronger than the other, and it'll actually start to dislocate the muscle. The joint, and displace the joint, and that can cause pain. If it doesn't, then what it does, it leaves the joint vulnerable for injury if you ever engage or affected by like a sudden movement. And if that joint is displaced even like a couple of millimeters, it could lead to some pretty nagging injuries. So if you're engaged in strength training, it's important to understand opposing muscle groups that work at every joint, and that's pretty much what we're going to talk about in this discussion. I want everybody to understand, where are the important joints and then what muscle groups work each joint. So if you start, your exercise program, you'll make sure that you're working opposing muscle groups equally. Okay. So I understand that a lot of you will say, okay, well, I want to get stronger. Great. I want to look better. Great. But if you're not working opposing muscle groups, then you're not putting yourself in a very good situation. So again, let's start understanding that the important concept in strength training is joint stabilization, and then you can get stronger, get bigger, look better, all you want, as long as you're stabilizing your joints. All right. All right, so if you are considering engaging in strength training, or if you're already engaged in strength training, then you're putting yourself in a good situation, because there's several health benefits. Now, there's not nearly as many health benefits as engaging in cardiorespiratory endurance, and we've already talked about that in a previous chapter. However, cardiorespiratory endurance coupled with a strength training program starts to maximize benefits of exercise. So obviously you get stronger, you improve your joint stabilization and posture. Posture is same concept as joint stabilization, and I'll describe that in a little while. You have the improved ability to perform daily activities. You might not notice it now, but as you start to age, and really the aging process starts about 25 years of age. The aging process starts gradually, starts slowly, and then it increases its rate as you get older. So the more, the stronger you are, the more muscle mass you have. Obviously, you'll have an ability to slow the aging process down throughout life. Okay, it increases bone density, or at least it helps you maintain bone density. I've talked about your body wanting to be at its most rested state. A couple of times in previous discussions. But if your body doesn't need all the bone density, and really bone density is the storage place for calcium and phosphorus. Those are key components to muscle contraction. So if you're engaged in regular strength training exercises, and your body knows that it needs a lot of calcium and phosphorus to contract its muscles, it's going to maintain it. So and not only that, all the muscles are attached to bone, and so the bone provides a leverage point for muscles to work. So there's a constant pull. So if your body senses that there's constant pull of the muscles on the bone, then the body will maintain its bone structure. Okay, so with an increase, or at least the maintenance of high levels of bone density, decreases the likelihood of developing osteoporosis, which is a disease characterized by brittle bones or low bone density. Strength training increases the size of muscle fibers, and that's how we get stronger, and I'll talk about that in a little while. So I'm sure you've heard of the concept of increasing metabolism. Well, anytime we work the muscles, they actually break apart. They actually tear. There's a lot of micro tears. I mean, millions of micro tears that occur throughout the muscle fibers. I mean, the muscle. So throughout the muscle fibers, and whenever we sleep, we repair our bodies. So we repair our bodies, or we repair all those tears when we sleep. So in all actuality, we're burning calories, because it takes a lot of calories to repair the body. So in all actuality, we're burning fat in our sleep. So that's why most benefits are accompanied with an endurance training program. All right, so a brief description of the overview of the muscle, of how it's structured. Now we're going to talk a lot about this in other classes. You'll learn a lot more about this in anatomy and physiology, foundations of kinesiology, and we'll talk about this in exercise phys. So the muscle starts with the belly, the muscle itself, and that's, if we were to cut the skin open and cut it apart, this is what we would see. And if we would cut the muscle, like a cross-section cut of the muscle, we would see all these circles. We call these circles the fascicles, or the fasciculi. So this is the, I guess, primary breakdown of the muscle. And then within each fascicle, you have even further divisions called the muscle fiber. Okay. So right here, I don't know. This is a graphic representation. I don't know in all actuality how many fascicles are in a muscle, but you can see how the breakdown starts to occur, and it even breaks down further. When we look at the breakdown of the muscle fiber, it breaks down into the myofilament, the myofibrils, and you can see the myofibrils. So there's hundreds of myofibrils located in a muscle fiber, and there's dozens of muscle fibers within one fascicle, and then there's dozens of fascicles within one muscle. All right, so it's just a constant breakdown until you get the smallest functional units, which are the myofibrils and the myofilaments. Okay, so you look at the myofibrils. They're divided into the sarcomeres, and you can see the zigzag line. We call those the Z lines. So Z line to Z line is one sarcomere, so that's one functional unit. But you can see that there's hundreds, and and then even if we're looking at the cross section of the myofiber, you can see that there's probably even thousands and millions of functional units. Okay, so in order for the muscle to contract, each of these functional units decrease in size. And we're going to explain that as we go through. Okay, but really from this picture, I just want you to see how the muscle is broken down to its smallest functional units, which are the sarcomeres that contain the actin and myosin myofilaments. Okay, but I'll talk more about that as we go through. All right, so here is a breakdown of the a microscopic or an enhanced, enlarged version of the myofilaments. Okay, so the endpoints, this would be where the zigzag lines we saw were in the previous picture. This is the Z line, or the endpoint of a sarcomere, and there's the other endpoint of the sarcomere. Okay, so the sarcomere is composed of these thin filaments, thin myofilaments. These are actin, so actin is thin. And then you have the thick myofilaments, which is myosin. Okay, and you can tell that myosin has all these protruding or projecting heads. We call these the myosin heads. Okay, so in order for a muscle to contract, these myosin heads, my cursor keeps coming off. The myosin heads attach to actin and pulls actin towards the middle. So in all actuality, the two endpoints come closer together. So you can see the top version. This is relaxed, where the sarcomeres are at its greatest distance apart, and then after the myosin heads attach to actin, and all the myosin heads move towards the center, it brings the endpoints closer. So now at its contracted state, the sarcomeres are at its closest distance that they can achieve. Okay. So again, you can see that from the previous picture, the zigzag line, those are the endpoints, and that's the actin. The red lines in this picture are actin, the thin filaments, and then the thick bands in the middle. You can see here is myosin. It has those heads, so myosin attaches to actin and brings it closer together. Okay. Now, so how does a muscle contract? Well, you have millions and millions and millions and probably billions of sarcomeres that all come together, and it brings the two attachment points of the muscle towards each other. Okay. Okay, so some basic understanding of the skeletal muscle. So there's three types of muscles. You have the cardiac muscle, then you have smooth muscle. Cardiac muscle is muscle located in the heart. It's the only place where it's found. Smooth muscle is located in the digestive system and in the arteries. They allow in the digestive system, it allows for food to pass, and in the arteries, it allows for the artery to constrict and relax depending on how much oxygen muscles need. Okay, but in this class we'll talk primarily about, or in this discussion we're going to talk primarily or exclusively about skeletal muscle, which is the muscle that's responsible for movement. Okay. Now, it's called skeletal muscle because it attaches to the skeletal system. It attaches to bone. So every muscle has at least two attachment points. The names of those two attachment points are the origin and the insertion. Okay? So the origin is where the muscle begins, and then the insertion is where the muscle ends. Okay, so if you were to look at the muscles, let's look at a biceps muscle. Everybody knows where a bicep muscle is. You have two attachment points. You have one in the shoulder and one in the forearm. I can't really see with this camera. So sorry. So one in the forearm. All right. So whenever the muscle contracts, it performs the action. All right. The action is the movement of the insertion towards the origin. So if I was to flex my bicep muscle, my forearm would be moving towards my shoulder. Okay, so again, the two attachment points are in the shoulder and in the forearm. All right, so if we're looking at we're trying to determine what are the two endpoints. Well, the action is my forearm towards the shoulder. Therefore, my insertion would be in the forearm because the insertion is moving towards the origin. Okay, insertion moves, origin is stationary. And that's for every muscle. Okay, that's for every muscle. Every muscle has an origin and an insertion. The origin is it doesn't move. The insertion, it moves towards the origin when the muscle contracts. Okay, so again, the origin always pulls the insertion towards itself, or the insertion always moves towards the origin. The origin never moves. Okay, and I'm gonna talk about origin and insertion through through a majority of or not a majority, but a lot of the muscles that we have in our body as we go through today's discussion. Okay, so the types of contractions. So whenever we contract, the muscles work, but they don't always move. So in a contraction where the muscle does not move, that's called an isometric contraction. Okay, so if you imagine, like, let's say you were to push against the wall. The wall doesn't move. But if you felt that person who's pushing against the wall, they're contracted, they're working, their body wants to work. But since the muscles aren't moving, there's no change in distance of the sarcomere. So we call that an isometric contraction. Now, isometric contractions are still effective. I mean, if you're trying to get a good workout in, I mean, doing some isometric contractions is almost just as effective. It's especially effective among elderly people. People you're trying to give them some physical activity, but they're limited on motion. Isometric exercises are very, very, very beneficial. People who are injured, who are trying to recover, lots of times they engage in isometric contraction. At least that's the treatment plan, because maybe perhaps they're limited in their range of motion. Okay. An isometric contraction could occur also. Let's say you're trying to do a bench press and the weight is too heavy for you to move. So you could be pushing against the bar trying to move it, but you're just not quite getting it up. Everything is contracted, just the muscles aren't moving. So that's an isometric contraction. Okay. But for the most part, all movement engages in isotonic contractions. That's whenever the muscle moves as it contracts. Okay, so with every repetition of a muscle contraction, so if you're doing a bicep curl, you would start with your arm fully extended, and then you would contract, and then take it back towards its resting point, or its original point, or its original phase, right? Okay, so the initial contraction, moving it from extension to contraction, is called the concentric phase. All right, so during the concentric phase, the muscle shortens as the insertion moves toward the origin. So again, when we're doing the bicep curl, the bicep is attached to the shoulder and the forearm. So whenever I contract, the forearm moves towards the shoulder. That's the insertion moving toward the origin. All right, that's the concentric phase. Now, the eccentric phase is whenever I return this muscle back to its resting form, or resting phase. Okay, that's the eccentric phase. All right. So again, concentric phase is whenever the muscle contracts and the muscle shortens. All right. Now, the eccentric phase, the muscle is still contracted. It's the same muscle, the biceps muscle in this case. All right. Just because I'm here doesn't mean all of a sudden the tricep starts to work. That's not the case. It's the bicep still working, and it's moving toward, or at least it's guiding the muscle back to its resting point. Okay, so in order to exercise effectively and to get the most results from exercise or from strength training, you should work the eccentric phase. That's the most important phase of the repetition. Okay. All right, so concentric phase is whenever we contract. Eccentric phase is when we guide the muscle back to relaxation. Now, can the muscle return back to its resting point without us guiding it? Yeah, you contract and just let it go. Okay, and we see that. If you've ever been to the weight room, you see somebody exercising in the concentric phase. They'll be doing bench press, they'll be pushing up, which is the concentric phase, and then they don't do anything in the eccentric phase. So all they do is just drop the bar back to their chest, and then they push up again. And they just drop the bar back to their chest, and they just push up again. Okay. Now, in order to get an effective workout, you got to push up, you got to explode up, and then you got to slowly bring the bar back down to your chest. That's an eccentric workout. Okay, so if you want to get stronger, the most effective phase of a repetition is the eccentric phase, and that's every exercise. Bicep curl, I don't know if you can see me. So if I was to do a bicep curl, I would go up, and then instead of letting my arm just go straight down, I would guide my arm back to its resting point. All right, so if I was doing a curl, it'd be quick up, slow down, quick up, slow down. Okay, bench press, it would be push up, slow down. Okay, so that's the difference. Hope you like my demonstrations. That's the difference between the concentric phase and the eccentric phase. Okay, now it's important to understand these concepts because these concepts allow you to engage in proper movement. Okay, again, you can go to a weight room and you can see people working out, and you see a lot of them working out incorrectly. Like I said, they're bouncing their bar off their chest, or they're swaying back and forth, or they're using counter movement to generate the opposing movement, and that's just not the way it's supposed to be done, or at least you're not going to get the maximum benefits from that. Okay. So just understand, so start to understand the concentric phase and the eccentric phase, and remember, it's the same muscle that's involved in both phases of a contraction. Okay, now we do have opposing muscle groups, but even then, they go through the concentric and eccentric phases on their own, not at the same time as its opposing muscle group. So, for example, the opposing muscle groups of the elbow or the biceps, and the tricep. So whenever the bicep works, I mean, the bicep is contracted. The tricep is not contracted. Okay, so if I want to guide the weight back down to its resting point, it's still the bicep that's contracting, but in the eccentric phase. Okay, now if I started with my elbow flexed or my elbow bent, and I pushed off to be able to extend my elbow, so like let's say there was a bar right here, and I needed to push it to extend it. That's the concentric phase of my tricep. Okay. And then if it's returning back to its original position, I'm still using my tricep to guide it back to the original position. That's the eccentric phase of my tricep. Okay, so you guys can get, you guys can do these on your own, and you can understand, oh yeah, the same muscle group is contracted whenever I go in both directions. Okay. All right, so that's pretty much what I just said with in reference to the concentric and eccentric phases. Okay, so whenever we engage in exercise, how much do we do? Okay, well, there's a couple of concepts to understand, and this is going to help you if you're developing a new exercise plan. First of all, a repetition. A repetition is just one complete cycle of an exercise. So it's up to down. It's the concentric and eccentric. All right, that's a rep. So a set is a group of reps without rest. So how many reps should we do in a set? Well, it depends on your goal, on your goals, but you want to reach what's called volitional fatigue. Now, in volitional fatigue, it's the fatigue experience when we can no longer do an exercise correctly. Okay, so it prevents the continuation of correct execution. And I know that you know this. I know that you know what it feels like. You probably just never heard this term before. So let's say you're doing bench press, right? So the first couple of reps, you're just up, down, up, down, up, down. And then you get to a point where you reach volitional fatigue, and this is what volitional fatigue feels like. It's up, down, and you start twisting your body, and you're like, really struggling to push it up, and you start to shake. At that point, you've reached volitional fatigue. All right, you can't continue the exercise correctly. Okay, so depending on your goals will determine when you should reach volitional fatigue. Okay, so when you look down here at the strength training zones, if you're wanting to increase size, if you want to increase size and strength, then you have to use heavier weight with fewer reps. Okay, so you want to reach volitional fatigue within 4 to 6 reps. Okay, now think about it. I mean, if you, let's say I have some scissors right here. All right, let's say I did scissors for if I use scissors for bicep curls. Okay, scissors weigh, I mean, a fraction of a pound. Okay, I can do curls with scissors probably forever and never get tired. Okay. And if I do that, I won't get any benefits from strength training because I'm not reaching volitional fatigue within 4 to 6 reps. Now, if I got a 75-pound dumbbell, that's way out of my league. If I got a 50-pound dumbbell, I could do 1, 2, 3, and then probably fatigue. Okay. So if I'm reaching volitional fatigue before 4 to 6 reps, then I may want to decrease the weight. So then I can go with maybe a 40-pound weight, and with a 40-pound weight, I can get to about 5. And then I'm starting to like sway and really use my back and my shoulders and everything else other than my bicep to complete the exercise. Okay, so that's what volitional fatigue means. Okay. Now, if you don't want to increase size, but you still want to get stronger, just lower your weight, add more reps, reach volitional fatigue within 8 to 12 reps, okay? And if you want to just maintain strength and not really get stronger or not, then definitely not increase in size, then do even more reps than that. I mean, anywhere between 14 to 20 reps, okay? But usually people like to get stronger. A lot of people don't like to get bigger. So again, you can just lower your weight, try to reach volitional fatigue of each exercise within 8 to 12 reps. Okay?